Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the Afternoon Agenda on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. This show is all about your opinion and mine. So it's not really news as you know it, but discussion and debate on things that are or really need to be on your agenda. So with that in mind, here's what we'll be covering today. It's been dubbed Flop 26 by critics, but the Prime Minister is set to explain why the Climate Summit agreement was worth the time and expense. The UK's terror threat level has been increased to severe following the Liverpool explosion, as Boris Johnson says the UK will not be cowed by terrorism. Our Home and Security editor will have all the latest details on that story. And it may not be on the agenda of traditional news outlets, but we really need to get a grip of this migrant crisis. Is Vladimir Putin trying to destabilise Europe? That's the agenda for the next hour. What's on yours? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or of course you can tweet me at gbnews. But first, it's time for the news headlines with Polly.
Very good afternoon to you. Your GB News at 4 o'clock. The terrorism threat level in the UK has been increased to severe, meaning an attack is highly likely. It follows yesterday's car explosion at the Women's Hospital in Liverpool. Officers believe they have now identified the passenger who detonated an improvised device in a cab, killing himself. The driver, David Perry, escaped with minor injuries, and he's being praised for his actions, as he said he'd locked the car doors moments before the explosion. 4 people have been arrested under anti-terrorism legislation.
Is a stark reminder of the need for us all to remain utterly vigilant. What yesterday showed, above all, is that the British people will never be cowed by terrorism. We will never give in to those who seek to divide us with senseless acts of violence. And our freedoms and our way of life will always prevail.
Well, meanwhile, a police cordon has been placed around the address where the taxi driver picked up his passenger. Police say significant items were found during a search of the property. A second address is also, we understand, being searched at the moment.
Our inquiries have led us to 2 addresses. The first was Sutcliffe Street in the Kensington area of Liverpool. And at this location, 3 men, aged 21, 26 and 29, were arrested yesterday under Section 41 of the Terrorism Act. Again in the Kensington area, a further man, aged 20, was arrested under Section 41 of the Terrorism Act.
Well, away from events in Liverpool, the COVID-19 vaccine booster programme has been extended to over 40s. The Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation says they should be offered a booster 6 months after their second dose. 16 and 17-year-olds are also being encouraged to come forward for a second Pfizer jab. The Prime Minister Boris Johnson urging everyone to take the vaccine.
It would be an utter tragedy if, after everything we've been through, people who had done the right thing by getting double vaccinated ended up becoming seriously ill or even losing their lives because they allowed their immunity to wane by not getting their booster. And if you haven't even had one dose, it's not too late. In fact, there's never been a better time to get that vital protection as we head into winter.
Meanwhile, Austria is putting unvaccinated citizens into lockdown to slow the spread of coronavirus in the country. Anyone aged 12 and over who hasn't had the jab is now banned from leaving their homes except to collect food, shopping, go to work, exercise, or even going to get the jab itself. The measures are in force now and will last for at least 10 days and estimated to expect around 2 million people. Here, 12 children and 1 adult have been taken to hospital following a ceiling collapse at a school in South London. Around 20 firefighters and 3 fire engines were called to Rosemead Preparatory School in Dulwich after the incident in a Year 3 classroom. The chairman of governors of the school has confirmed there are no life-threatening injuries. The real living wage has been increased across the country. The new hourly rate will go up to £11.50 for people working in London and £9.90 for jobs outside the capital. Almost 9,000 employers already pay the voluntary rate, which is independently calculated and higher than the statutory living wage. And turkey still on the menu this Christmas. Poultry bosses saying there'll definitely be enough to go around this festive season. The British Poultry Council says staffing pressures have eased due to more visas being issued to foreign workers. They've confirmed producers have managed to recruit some EU seasonal workers who've settled in the UK. You're up to date. Now back to the afternoon agenda with Alex.
Hello, you're with the afternoon agenda, and we really need to talk about the migrant crisis. Hindsight is a marvellous thing. In retrospect, when we join up the dots, strategies become apparent and pitfalls appear less inevitable. Auditing the news headlines today, you were left to wonder whether many headlines have a common denominator, a Russian one, called Vlad. First, COP26 became FLOP26 after feckless disregard from Russia, who probably consider the intercontinental conflab as Western hostility against Soviet strength. After all, the Kremlin has allegedly been playing tombola with gas prices, knowing that Germany is desperate for a new energy supply, while their plans for a new pipeline with Moscow, dodging Ukraine, are all up in the air, while Russia wants to penalise both Kiev and the EU for flirting with each other. Then, Russian neighbour and regional patsy Belarus is reportedly helping to ship thousands of migrants to the EU's frontiers of Poland, Lithuania and Latvia, supposedly plying them with vodka and allegedly planning to tool up the hordes of men straining at the barbed wire fences to clash with the Polish troops now assembled there, as the desperate migrants promised transit into Europe perish from starvation and cold. Reports of lasers and strobes being used to boggle the Polish troops also suggest sinister intervention is definitely afoot. Now, we're being told that UK Secret Service forces are being deployed to Ukraine, where 100,000 Russian troops are yet again assembling on the border, as well as conducting joint military operations with ever-faithful bag carrier Belarus, who enjoyed the spectacle of Russian nuclear warplanes buzzing over their airspace. Having snatched Crimea with barely a slap on the wrist by the international community, Putin seems emboldened to not only continue his geopolitical microaggressions, but escalate them into outright invasion. Meanwhile, migrants continue to flood across the English Channel, causing Boris Johnson's poll ratings to crumble. A neat way to serve a hefty blow to a Britain beginning to strut its stuff on the world stage with G7 and climate summits, flush with Brexity ballsiness, deigning to tell Vlad to step away from the coal. Those who claim Russia meddled with Brexit contradict other Moscow analysts that believe the Kremlin don't want an assertive Britain, reconnecting with America and the Anglosphere, making submarines and winning vaccine races and choreographing global affairs free from Brussels' bureaucratic blundering and notorious ineptitude. But trying to second-guess which way the mercurial Putin might veer is a game of chess, as Russia is now positioning to be able to resolve the confected border crisis, no doubt at a price. A hybrid game of disinformation and destabilisation, and one against which we must be on guard, according to the Chief of the Defence Staff, General Sir Carter, who predicts trouble ahead. What is going on? Today, we really need to talk about the migrant crisis. Well, Keir Giles is an expert in Russian power projection at the international affairs think tank Chatham House. Keir, thank you so much for coming on today. Is there potentially something that's connected these newspaper headlines we're seeing today, from the migrants appearing on the borders of Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Russian exercises on the Ukraine border, flying nuclear planes over Belarus, potentially even our own migrant crisis? Or would that be giving Russia more credit than it's due?
Well, you mentioned the importance of joining the dots, and that is exactly what Russia watchers have been trying to do since this crisis on the border between Belarus and Poland started, to try to figure out what's behind it. Because one of the unusual features of what Belarus is doing and Russia is allowing at the moment is that they've not stated the end game. It's not exactly clear what they want to achieve from this. And so you have to look at what else Russia is doing elsewhere, because it's not unusual for something to be staged as a diversion from where the real event is going to take place. And with that in mind, of course, people have been watching the Russian troop movements around Ukraine's border, not necessarily towards it, but possibly preparing for action against Ukraine, possibly a move into Belarus. Put it all together, yes, and you have an overall pattern where the migrants that are being delivered to the Polish border are serving some other purpose, but we're not quite sure exactly what it is yet. One of the obvious games that was on the table in the early stages of this was to try to split the EU. It wouldn't have been completely unreasonable for Lukashenko in Belarus and Putin in Russia to think that if they drove a further wedge between Poland and Brussels, then there might actually be some movements towards a Polish exit from the EU, because they already had many of the same arguments going on with the EU that the UK did before Brexit. Now, the really surprising thing is that that hasn't happened, because the EU, contrary to a lot of people's expectations, has done the right thing. It hasn't thrown Poland under the bus. It hasn't criticized it for not opening its borders to these migrants. Instead, it stepped up its economic power, which is the only way it can really get things done, to step in and try to cut this pipeline of migrants by threatening all of the airlines and now individuals who are taking part in this human trafficking with direct sanctions unless they stop this illegal activity. And that's the second unexpected thing that's come out of this. The proof that sanctions, or the threat of them, do actually work, because those airlines have stopped delivering the migrants into Belarus to be shipped onto the border. And now you're even hearing about Iraq arranging evacuation flights to take its people back from Belarus as well. So unusually, the EU has done the right thing. It's shown solidarity and unity. It's recognized that this is an attack not just on Poland, but on Europe as a whole. And it's actually taken action to deal with the situation.
How much is Belarus, do you think, behaving under the instruction of the Kremlin? Would that be overegging the situation there as well? I mean, is Belarus more of, I heard it described earlier, as an unwieldy tool, a country that, in fact, quite enjoys to operate unilaterally and courts both sides?
Well, that used to be the case until the elections in August last year, when it was so clear that President Lukashenko had not been re-elected but clung onto power, that he desperately needed more Russian support. And that's when a lot of that independence that he'd been showing previously actually got reined in. Now, you described Belarus as the patsy earlier, and that's the interpretation that a lot of Russia watchers are leaping to, because it makes sense that all of this would be driven by President Putin as big brother and the one who has most to gain from this crisis. But there isn't any direct evidence of that so far. It does seem some of the migrants are arriving through Russia, and certainly if President Putin wanted this to stop, It would, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this wasn't some harebrained scheme that Lukashenko came up with on his own, and it's just being exploited by Russia now. In fact, some of the wilder suggestions that you've heard from Lukashenko have been quietly slapped down by Putin, like, for example, his threat to turn off the gas taps into Europe. That's actually something which is under Russia's control, and Russia would not want to happen without its say-so.
We actually have two concurrent migrant crises at the moment. We have the fresh one appearing now on the borders of Poland, Lithuania and Latvia. And of course, we've now got migrants trying to get over repeatedly, day after day after day, into the UK over the English Channel. And it seems to me that our own migrant crisis is probably a hangover from the previous exodus into Europe about 5 years ago. But could there potentially even be Russian fingerprints or Belarusian fingerprints on that in terms of enabling and abetting people trafficking networks?
That is very hard to say without getting deep into those networks and seeing precisely where the people who are arriving in the UK are coming from. It would be surprising if this current crisis at the other end of Europe was already generating people coming into the UK. And obviously, it's a very different situation. France isn't deliberately bringing in migrants to deliver them to Britain. There are some things in common, of course. France is quite happy to pass on the problem. And the people who are claiming asylum, whether it's in Poland, trying to get to Germany, or trying to get to the UK, are in fact leaving countries where they are perfectly safe, as opposed to fleeing directly from war and persecution and danger. But beyond that, no, these are very different situations. And as you say, the migrant crisis that the UK is facing has much deeper roots. But of course, they both come together in having an incoherent policy on migration and not actually being completely clear what it is that you want to achieve through having an influx of immigrants and when exactly enough is enough.
Keir, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us your expertise. We're very grateful for that. Keir Giles, who's the Russia expert at Chatham House. Now, another foreign affairs expert, Niall Gardiner of the US-based Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, joins me now. Now, we've had conversations between us in the past over how the Kremlin might perceive Brexit. We've heard all the allegations that they wanted Brexit to happen. In fact, there was remarks that perhaps Russia aided and abetted that campaign, remarks that have, of course, been disproven. But you see things from a slightly different angle when it comes to the Kremlin's take on a newly invigorated and independent Britain.
That's right, Alex. Thanks very much for having me on the show today. And without a doubt, I think, Brexit is actually very bad news for Moscow. It's bad news for Putin. Because if you look at the role that Britain is now playing on the international stage, significantly greater in the Brexit era, and the British have been standing up to the Russians over Belarus, over Ukraine. And of course, the Russians do not fear the European Union. They view the EU as just, monumentally weak and useless. And Britain outside of the European Union is a far more formidable adversary for the Russians. So this whole idea that the Russians, backed Brexit, that they thought it was a good thing, for Putin, I think is quite ridiculous. It's sort of myth that the Remainer camp has put forward, but it's complete disinformation. And Brexit is very, very bad news, actually, for Vladimir Putin.
Now, America has today thrown, or at least vocally thrown, support behind Poland, given the emerging crisis on its borders. But how much do you believe America would be willing to act if this did escalate into fighting?
Well, it's a very good question. I have to say, I don't have a lot of, faith, actually, in Joe Biden's leadership. And Biden has said very little, actually, about the Belarus crisis. He's very focused on domestic issues. This is a sinking presidency, hugely unpopular, of course, with the American people, according to the latest opinion poll. So Biden isn't focused on international leadership on the world stage. And of course, Vladimir Putin is taking advantage of this. He senses American weakness on the international stage. And that's why we have right now 100,000 Russian troops massing on the Ukraine border. And Joe Biden is asleep at the wheel. And so when America is weak, the Russians and other adversaries of the United States take advantage of that situation. So we're not really seeing any clear leadership from Joe Biden at this time. And I think that, Putin certainly views Biden as weak-kneed, as we saw over the Afghanistan debacle. This is an extremely dangerous situation. I think there's a very good chance, actually, the Russians will stage a major invasion, a further invasion, actually, of Ukraine. And that's why he's got all those troops massing on the border there. And the free world needs to wake up to the reality of what's happening here.
I mean, is there an appetite for us to get involved? Because it almost seems to me it could end up essentially escalating this into Cold War Mark II, when perhaps we should keep our noses out. But of course, last time that Russia pulled off a move like this and essentially forcibly took Crimea and staged what many believe to be a phony referendum to justify their move, the international community didn't really say or do anything.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I mean, the Russians just acted with complete impunity, and they expect the same thing will happen if they move tens of thousands of troops into Ukraine today. So it's an extremely dangerous scenario. I think the British government's doing the right thing at the moment. It's helping to reinforce Ukraine's defences. Also, of course, the British are giving very strong support to Poland over the Belarus crisis. And let's not forget, of course, that the Russians are using the Belarus migrant crisis as a diversion for what they're doing on the Ukraine front. And the Russians are playing a very, very, devious game here on the international stage. We have to be on our guard. And the message that must be sent to Moscow is that the free world will stand up to Russian aggression. And I believe the Russians think the West is extremely weak at the moment. And they're absolutely right, of course, with regard to the European Union, who are absolutely fundamentally useless as some kind of power on the international stage. Much as Emmanuel Macron dreams of a European Union army, the EU is hugely weak. The only thing really stopping Russian ambitions, of course, in Eastern Europe as a whole, is the NATO alliance. And unfortunately, Joe Biden has undermined NATO with the Afghanistan withdrawal, throwing US allies under the bus. This is a moment when Britain has to lead, I think far more strongly on the international stage, has to stand up to Russia, send a clear message to Putin that his actions are unacceptable. But this is a moment for the free world to show strength and determination in the face of immense evil.
Well, we wait with bated breath. Niall, it's lovely having you back on the programme. That's Niall Gardner, Foreign Affairs expert at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. We are going to be continuing this conversation, really trying to pick apart what on earth is going on with this migrant crisis throughout the show. And, of course, I want to know what you think. Have you got analysis on the current situation? If you do, email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can also tweet me at gbnews. And as per usual, we have a poll up right now asking, is Vladimir Putin trying to destabilise Europe? Bit of a no-brainer, that, really. But cast your vote so I know what you, the nation, really thinks. Well, we're now going to go over to lovely Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, who is waiting for us near number 10 Downing Street just before the Prime Minister is about to make an important speech to Parliament. Tom.
That's right, Alex. The Prime Minister is about to get up on his feet in the House of Commons to really give MPs his assessment of what COP26 was all about, to try and paint his vision of whether or not it was a success. Now, last night the Prime Minister said he'd give it more than 6 out of 10. Not the most ringing endorsement you can imagine, but quite clearly Boris Johnson has just started to speak, so let's go and hear what he has to say.
On behalf of the whole House, I want to pay tribute to the swift and professional response by the extraordinary men and women of the emergency services, who once again showed themselves to be the very best among us. The Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre today raised the nationwide threat level from substantial to severe, meaning an attack is highly likely. The police are keeping both myself and the Home Secretary informed on developments, and we will, of course, in turn, keep the House updated on the investigation as it continues. And now, Madam Deputy Speaker, with your permission, I should like to make a statement on the United Nations Climate Change Conference, better known as COP26, which took place in the magnificent city of Glasgow over the past 2 weeks. It was the biggest political gathering of any kind ever held in the United Kingdom. 194 countries were represented. We had around 120 heads of state and government, 38,000 accredited delegates, and there were countless tens of thousands more in the streets and parks and venues outside. It was a summit that many people predicted would fail, and a summit that I fear some quietly wanted to fail. Yet it was a summit that proved the doubters and the cynics wrong, because COP26 did not just succeed in keeping 1.5 alive, it succeeded in doing something no UN climate conference has ever done before, by uniting the world in calling time on coal. In 25 previous COPs, all the way back to Berlin in 1995, not one delivered a mandate to remove so much as a single lump of coal from one power station boiler. For decades, tackling the single biggest cause of carbon emissions proved to be as challenging as eating the proverbial elephant. It was just so big that no one knew quite where to start. But in Glasgow, Madam Deputy Speaker, we took the first bite because we have secured a global commitment to phasing down coal. And as John Kerry pointed out, you can't phase out coal without first phasing it down as we transition to other cleaner energy sources. And we have, for the first time, a worldwide recognition that we won't get climate change under control as long as our power stations are consuming vast quantities of the sedimentary super polluter that is coal. That alone is a great achievement. But we haven't just signalled the beginning of the end for coal, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've ticked our boxes on cars, cash and trees as well. The companies that build a quarter of the world's automobiles have agreed to stop building carbon emission vehicles by 2035. And cities from Sao Paulo to Seattle have pledged to ban them from their streets. We've pioneered a whole new model, an intellectual breakthrough that sees billions in climate finance, development bank investment, and so forth being used to trigger trillions from the private sector to drive the big decarbonisation programs in countries like South Africa. And we've done something that absolutely none of the commentators saw coming, by building a coalition of more than 130 countries to protect up to 90% of our forests around the world, those great natural soakers of carbon. Mr. Speaker, none of this was a happy accident or inevitability. The fact that we were there at all in the face of a global pandemic is in itself the result of a vast and complex effort involving countless moving parts. Right until the very end, there was the real prospect that no agreement would be reached. And what has been achieved has only come about thanks to month after month of concerted British diplomacy, the countless meetings, the innumerable phone calls, the banging of heads at UNGA, Petersburg dialogue, at President Biden's climate summit, the Security Council, the G7, the G20, and the setting of an example, several examples by the UK, because again and again the task of our negotiators was made easier by the fact that the UK wasn't asking anyone to do anything that we aren't doing ourselves. We've slashed our use of coal so much that our last 2 coal-fired power stations will go offline for good in 2024. We've more than doubled our climate finance, providing vital support for poor and vulnerable nations around the world. We've made a legally binding commitment to reach net zero, the first major economy to do so. We've set a date at which hydrocarbon internal combustion engines will reach the end of the road. And we've shown the world that it is possible to grow your economy by cutting carbon, creating markets for clean technology, and delivering new green jobs that reduce emissions and increase prosperity. Every one of those achievements was not just great news for our country and our planet, but another arrow in the quiver of our fantastic team in Glasgow. A team led by the COP president, my right honourable friend, the member for Reading West. And from the moment he picked up the COP reins, he has been absolutely tireless in his efforts to secure the change that we need. And although I'm pretty sure that what he really needs now is a well-earned break, I don't think any of us here are going to be able to restrain him, to hold him back as he sets off pushing countries to go further still and making sure that the promises made in Glasgow are delivered and not diluted. But success has many parents, and I want to say a huge thank you also to the officials in my own COP unit, Downing Street and across government, in embassies, UK embassies around the world, and at the United Nations, who pulled out all the stops to make the event work and to shepherd through the agreements that have been reached. I also want to thank everybody on the ground at the SEC in Glasgow, security, catering, transport, the relentlessly cheery volunteers, the police from across the whole country who kept everybody safe from harm, and the public health authorities who kept us safe from COVID, and everyone in the Scottish Government. And I want to say, above all, a big, big thank you to the people of Glasgow, who had to put up with so much disruption in their city and who welcomed the world all the same. And I say to the people of Glasgow, we could not have done it without you. Is there still more to do? Well, of course, there is. And I'm not for one moment suggesting that we can safely close the book on climate change. In fact, I can think of nothing more dangerous, quite right, I can think of nothing more dangerous than patting ourselves on the back, Madam Deputy Speaker, and telling ourselves that the job is done. Because this job will not be complete until the whole world has not only set off on the goal to reach net zero, but arrived at that destination. A goal that, even with the best of intentions from all actors, cannot be achieved overnight. And while COP26 has filled me with optimism about our ability to get there, I cannot now claim to be certain that we will, because we have seen some countries that really should know better dragging their heels about their Paris commitments. But if, not this one, but if, and it is still a massive if, they make good on their pledges, then I believe that Glasgow will be remembered as the place where we secured a historic agreement and the world began to turn the tide. Before Paris, we were on course for 4 degrees of warming. After Paris, that number fell to a still catastrophically dangerous 3 degrees. This afternoon, after the Glasgow Climate Pact, it stands at close to 2. It's still too high. The numbers are still too hot. The warming is still excessive. But it's closer than we have ever been to the relative safety of 1.5 degrees, and now with an all-new roadmap to help us get there. Aristotle taught us that virtue comes not from reasoning and instruction, but from habit and from practice. So the success of the Glasgow Climate Pact lies not just in the promises, but in the move that the whole world has now made, from setting abstract targets to adopting the nuts and bolts programme of work to meet those targets and to reduce CO2 emissions. We're now talking about the how rather than the what, and getting into a habit of cutting CO2 that is catching on with not just with governments and businesses, but with billions of people around the world. And it is for that reason that I believe the COP26 in Glasgow has been a success, and that 1.5 is still alive, and that is something I believe that every person in our United Kingdom can and should take immense pride in, and I commend this statement to the House.
Sir Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in extending our thoughts across the House to the people of Liverpool who are in shock at yesterday's events and pay tribute to the response of the emergency services? Madam Deputy Speaker, can I start by paying tribute to the COP President? Whatever the shortcomings of the deal, his diligence, his integrity and his commitment to the climate are clear for all to see. And also to his team of civil servants. Their dedication, their expertise, their service never in doubt, but always remarkable. They knew that COP26 was the most important international summit ever hosted on these shores. Why, Madam Deputy Speaker? The simple maths of the climate crisis. At Paris, we set out the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. That is the tipping point, beyond that, the world is set to see billions of people facing extreme heat waves, countless millions displaced from their homes, and the destruction of natural wonders like the world's coral reefs. The science doesn't negotiate, and no politician can move the goalposts. To have any hope of 1.5 degrees, we must halve global emissions by 2030. The task of Glasgow was to set out credible plans for delivering that. And whilst the summit has been one of modest progress, we cannot kid ourselves. Plans to cut emissions are still way short. The pledges made in Glasgow for 2013, even if all fully implemented, represent less than 25% of the ambition required. Rather than a manageable 1.5 degrees, they put us on track for a devastating 2.4 degrees. And that's why, according to the UN Secretary-General, the goal of 1.5 degrees is now on life support. So we need to deliver intensive care. And that starts by being honest about what's gone wrong. International negotiations are complex and they are difficult. And those that have dragged their feet the most bear the greatest responsibility. But the summit was held back by the Prime Minister's guileless boosterism, which only served to embolden the big emitters. The Prime Minister praised inadequate net zero plans. He called the Australia plans heroic, even though their plan was so slow that it was in line with 4 degrees of global warming. By providing this cover, the Prime Minister had little chance of exerting influence over the other big emitters, and we saw many more disappointing national plans. The Prime Minister also dressed up modest sectoral commitments as transformational. Earlier in COP, the government claimed that 190 countries and organisations had agreed to end coal. On closer inspection, only 46 of them were countries. Of those, only 23 were new signatories, and of those 23, 10 do not even use coal. And the 13 that remained did not include the biggest coal users, China, the US, India and Australia. And as things would move forward with no public pressure, the big emitters were emboldened. They clubbed together later in COP to gut the main deal's wording on coal. Only someone who thinks that promises are meaningless could now argue that an agreement to phase down coal is the same as an agreement to phase it out. And then there was the long overdue £100 billion in climate finance. It's still not been delivered, even though this money was promised to developing countries over a decade ago. Failure to deliver has damaged trust and created a huge obstacle to building the coalition that can drive action climate between the most vulnerable developing countries and ambitious developed countries. That coalition was the foundation of the landmark Paris Agreement in 2015, creating the pincer movement to maximise pressure on the world's biggest emitters, including China. It's deeply regrettable that at Glasgow we did not see a repeat. Instead, developing countries were still having to make the case for the long-promised $100 billion in the final hours of the summit. Given all of this and the imperative to revive the 1.5 degrees from life support, The question is this: what is going to be different in the next year in the run-up to COP27? And Britain has a special and particular responsibility as COP president. First, we need to reassemble the Paris Climate Coalition and build trust with the developing world. But cutting overseas aid does not build trust, it destroys it. So will the Prime Minister immediately commit to reversing those cuts? Second, there can be no free passes for major emitters, including our friends. We are doing a trade deal with Australia, where we have allowed them to drop Paris temperature commitments. That was a mistake. Will the Prime Minister put it right? Third, the Prime Minister is right to say we need to power past coal and phase out fossil fuels. But his ability to lead on the issue internationally has been hampered by his actions at home. It has never made sense for the government to be flirting with a new coal mine or to greenlight the Cambo oil field. So will he rewrite the planning framework to rule out coal, and will he now say no to Cambo? Finally, will he sort out the Chancellor? The budget was delivered in the week before COP26, as world leaders began to arrive on these shores. It did not even mention climate change. It gave a tax break for domestic flights and fell woefully short of the investment needed to deliver green jobs and a fair transition. The Prime Minister has been the wrong man in the wrong place at the wrong time. And Glasgow has been a missed opportunity, a stumble forward when we needed to make great strides, more climate delay when we needed delivery, and 1.5 degrees is now on life support. We still have the chance to keep 1.5 degrees alive, but only with intensive care. We have to speak honestly about the challenge we face to rebuild the coalition that we need and to take on the big emitters. We can and we must change course. Thank you, Madam President.
Prime Minister.
Well, if I may say so, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's the usual pathetic attempt by the leader of the opposition to suck and blow at once. To congratulate the UK government for a success at COP, but somehow to attack myself. That's what he was trying to do, and I think it's pathetic. Let's take his points in turn. Australia signs up to net zero for the first time ever. Coal. No COP has ever mentioned phasing out coal before, Madam Deputy Speaker. 65 countries committed to phasing it out altogether by 2040, including the 4 biggest users of coal-fired power stations, Poland, Indonesia, and others. And Madam Deputy Speaker, he talks about climate finance, and the UK government rescinding its commitments. It is simply untrue, Madam Deputy Speaker. We have doubled our commitments to tackling climate change around the world and helping the developed world with £12.6 billion, as he knows full well, and that commitment is way outstrips what most other countries are making. And he talks about UK leadership throughout this campaign, which has been going on for 2 years to get the right result and to keep 1.5 alive. The UK has been way out in front under this government. We were the first major economy to legislate for net zero. 90% of the world has now followed us. At COP, we had one of the most ambitious NDCs, nationally determined contributions, of any country. If it hadn't been for the UK government, we would have had no inclusion of anything to do with nature and protecting forests at all, Madam Deputy Speaker. And they listened to us at COP because they knew that our 10-point plan was not only cutting emissions, but helping to generate hundreds of thousands of new high-wage, high-skill jobs. And that is how the world can see that is a programme that will enable them to power past carbon and to develop their economies. And as a result of everything that we have done at COP, we have been able, Madam Deputy Speaker, to keep 1.5 alive. And I feel, listening to the Right Honourable Gentleman, he's finding it very, very difficult to reconcile himself to the fact of a United Kingdom diplomatic and environmental success. And I think if he really meant all those fine words with which he began about UK negotiators and about the COP, he should stick to that script, because that was the right one.
Theresa May. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I refer the House to my entry in the Members' Register. May I first of all echo the remarks made by my right honourable friend.
Well, there we are. There's an ex-Prime Minister backing up the current Prime Minister in the face of some severe criticism from the opposition benches over whether COP26 was indeed worth the time and money, whether those targets will be met and, in fact, adhered to. Now, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson has also said today that the British people will never be cowed by terrorism following the explosion at Liverpool Women's Hospital. It comes as the terrorism threat level has been raised to severe, meaning an attack is highly likely. A man who died in the explosion brought a homemade bomb with him into a taxi and asked to be taken to the scene of the blast. 4 men have been arrested under terrorism laws in the city. Our GB News Home and Security Editor, Mark White, has sent us this report.
It's just before 11 a.m. on Remembrance Sunday. As the nation pauses to remember its war dead, this security camera captures the moment a taxi pulls up at the front of Liverpool Women's Hospital. Moments later, an explosion. As smoke pours from the taxi, the driver, David Perry, can be seen staggering from the vehicle, thankfully with only minor injuries. In the back of the cab, as it's engulfed in flames, a man who police now believe was a bomber, who brought his explosive device into the taxi. It's not clear what any intended target was, but police say he asked the driver to take him to the women's hospital. A memorial service was also taking place nearby. The explosion has now been formally declared a terrorist incident.
Following discussions with Army Ordnance Disposal, we are able to confirm that this is being treated as the ignition of an explosive device. Our inquiries also indicate that the device was brought into the cab by the passenger. We believe we know the identity of the passenger, but we cannot confirm this at this time.
The taxi driver, who's now been released from hospital and is recovering at home, has been hailed a hero. Away from the scene of the explosion, police raided 2 residential addresses and made 4 arrests. Those arrested under the Terrorism Act are still in police custody today, being questioned by counter-terrorism detectives who are trying to piece together information about the suspect and his movements prior to the explosion. At Rutland Avenue, around a mile from the hospital, there is still a heavy police presence. A mobile police command unit has been set up at the end of the street as a property linked to the dead suspect is searched. Neighbours told us of their shock at the unfolding events.
You don't really see stuff around here like that. I think it's a bit mad wherever you live, you see things like this, isn't it? We don't really know what's going on.
Yeah, it's a bit clueless.
Even the police just said they don't really know what's going on.
Well, the other police at that side said there was a manhunt.
Police and security services are now urgently trying to establish whether there is any wider threat to the public. They've said they've discovered significant items at the Rutland Avenue address and are likely to be involved in a prolonged search of that property. Mark White, GB News, Liverpool.
Well, Mark joins us live from Liverpool with the very latest. Mark, any updates?
Well, yes, in terms of the ongoing investigation, of course, the police and security services have been trying to determine whether there is any wider threat. Now, there is no specific intelligence of a wider threat, but this attack comes just weeks after the murder of Sir David Amess in a terrorist incident at a constituency surgery in Essex. So given that, the Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre has decided to raise the terrorist threat level to severe, meaning that an attack is highly likely. Now, this coincided with a meeting of the government's crisis cabinet committee, COBRA, which was chaired by the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and he addressed that raising of the terror threat level after that meeting. This is what he said.
It is a stark reminder of the need for us all to remain utterly vigilant, and the Independent Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre, JTAC, are today raising the UK's threat level from substantial to severe, meaning an attack is highly likely. But what yesterday showed, above all, is that the British people will never be cowed by terrorism. We will never give in to those who seek to divide us with senseless acts of violence. And our freedoms and our way of life will always prevail.
Mark, what more do we know about reports that the taxi driver David Perry may have indeed prevented what could have been a far more deadly attack?
Well, these are certainly reports not being confirmed by the authorities at this stage, but reports that are coming through from friends and colleagues in the taxi profession here in Liverpool, suggesting that this taxi driver, David Perry, had become suspicious of the man he had picked up on Sunday morning, that man had asked to be taken here to the Women's Hospital in Liverpool, that his suspicions became so overpowering that he decided to get out of that vehicle and to lock this person in the back of the vehicle. In fact, you can see from the video in my report there, it was just as his taxi was pulling up, that this explosive device detonated, and then just a split second later you see David Perry just stumbling from the front of the vehicle. Thankfully, he wasn't seriously injured. He was treated in hospital yesterday, but today has been released and he is back with his family, recovering, speaking to detectives about what exactly he witnessed. Whatever information he can give to them will be vital, of course, going forward, because the suspect is dead, and a lot of the forensic evidence will have been incinerated in that very intense blaze after the improvised explosive device detonated. So quite a tough job for the forensic teams, but this is what they're trained to do. They will, as a matter of urgency, Alex, be trying to find out exactly what the ingredients were for this bomb, how it was constructed, and crucially whether there might be people that were involved in helping in the construction of this device, and whether there may be other similar devices either under construction or out there.
Mark, thank you very much for that update. Now, after the break, a busy old day for the Prime Minister, who has also today confirmed booster vaccines are to be rolled out to the over 40s. We'll have reaction next. First, it's the weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. There will be a few fog patches once more overnight that'll take a while to clear, but for most of England and Wales it's a dry day tomorrow. A different day though for Scotland and Northern Ireland, with rain moving in and also turning windy thanks to this tangle of weather fronts approaching from the northwest. But high pressure is dominating elsewhere. There's this old set of weather fronts that's kind of fizzling out, but still providing some rain and drizzle through the evening over northern England and Wales, maybe parts of Cornwall too. But it does tend to fizzle out. We'll see some clearer skies across the south, and that may allow some fog patches to form, and clearer skies further north until that next weather system brings some rain and increasing winds across the northwest. Those gusty winds, though, will keep the temperatures up, so a mild night here. Elsewhere, a little cooler with temperatures well down into single figures. A mostly cloudy start then to Tuesday, but for most it will be a dry start. There will be some fog around across England and Wales that may take a while to clear.
And then mostly dry, and again it'll be pretty mild. If we see any brightness, could easily get into the teens, but feeling cooler with the wet and windy weather. A spell of very lively showers crosses Scotland with gusty winds and more showers, which turn a little wintry over the tops of the mountains overnight, and there'll still be a bit of snow on the hills as we head into Wednesday morning. A few showers then coming in on Wednesday for Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, Northwest England, but otherwise, again, elsewhere, most places dry, and a brighter day across much of the south and east with some decent spells of sunshine. But it will be still pretty windy, particularly in Britain, and that will make it feel cooler. And temperatures generally a little down on Wednesday as well, so a fresher feel, but still those numbers are about average for the time of year. It will turn milder again through the rest of this week. Lots of cloud around, but apart from a bit of rain across the northwest, most places dry. Signs of things turning colder, though, this weekend.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Coming up Monday on Dan Wootton Tonight, Lucy Moon star and voice of the people Carol McGiffin will give her no-nonsense, common-sense take on the world in Uncancelled. US talk radio firebrand and California governor candidate Larry Elder discusses the culture wars on both sides of the Atlantic and the Republicans' route back to the White House. Plus, positive professor Carol Sikora is here to dispel the COVID doom and gloom promoted elsewhere in the mainstream media. GB News star Neil Oliver returns as the outsider, and I'll bring you a first look at the front pages with my superstar panel, crown the day's greatest Britain and Union jackass, and debate a topic important to you in The Clash. That's Dan Wootton Tonight from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Monday to Thursday on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. All adults aged 40 to 49 years will be offered a booster jab, the Prime Minister has announced. The rollout was recommended in a briefing by the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation earlier today. They also advised that it should be offered 6 months after a second dose, irrespective of the vaccines given for the first and second doses. Well, I'm joined now to react to this by former Health Secretary Stephen Dorrell and Dr. Andrew Preston, a microbiologist at the University of Bath. I'm going to start with you, Stephen. It seems to me that there's not as much firepower in terms of putting out public encouragement to go and get these booster jabs. And do you think there's a risk that people are going to become a little bit complacent?
I do think that, yes. I think that the original vaccination campaign was a huge success story. It was obviously a success story that we were able to develop the vaccine as quickly as we did, and then we had the commitment to ensure that it was delivered efficiently as widely as possible. There was a lot of organisation behind that. There was also a lot of public information, easily available public information. I am concerned that the booster jab campaign doesn't appear to be running as slickly as the initial campaign did. And that clearly has significant implications for the effectiveness of the booster campaign. So I absolutely do think both that the organisation needs to be addressed and that the public information around it needs to be addressed.
Dr. Preston, how vital are these booster jabs going to be? We're seeing lockdowns being reintroduced on the continent, and I've heard other people proposing that perhaps we've now got cases reducing because there's been a lot more community transmission already. Where do you forecast the direction of travel?
Gosh, that's a dangerous game to play with this particular outbreak. You're right, it's plateaued. I'm not sure anyone exactly knows how it'll play out over the next few months. I think Europe are experiencing what we experienced just a couple of months ago, so that they're seeing the resurgence, through Delta, even though they've got relatively high levels of vaccination in some countries. And that's just testament to the fact that the Delta variant can still infect people, even though they've been double jabbed or previously infected, but of course shouldn't suffer the really extreme consequences of that. So, boosters are clearly going to play a part in trying to restrict the number of symptomatic cases. And of course, those are the ones, a small proportion of those will go on, require hospitalisation and even become fatalities, unfortunately. So boosters, we think, will, be key to perhaps, continuing to try and alleviate some of the pressure on our medical services as they reach their sort of peak busy period, really until January and February.
Going back to you, Stephen, as a former health secretary, do you think there's a risk here that the public were told that vaccines were our way out of this crisis? Most people in the country have now been double jabbed. They've had the onus pushed upon them of having to get 2 jabs to get certain status to be able to travel and things like that. We don't really have vaccine passports in England anyway. But do you think the risk here is people feel that they're already protected because they were told that they would be protected and that the vaccines might stop transmission, and actually that's not exactly coming to pass?
I'm not sure I do think that, actually. I think people do understand. They've been told, actually, from the beginning that there is that the vaccination is effective, but it has the effectiveness is likely to wear off. I think that's reasonably well understood by the public. I think, as we were saying earlier, the key thing is for the booster campaign to be properly publicised, properly organised, and for people to be encouraged, but actually for it to be rather stronger than that, that it is, if we're going to maintain downward pressure on infections and ensure that the health service doesn't come under unsustainable pressure, then there does need to be public participation in the booster campaign. And that's something that where I think both, as I said earlier, organisationally and in terms of public information, there needs to be a step up in the game as we've seen it so far.
Dr. Preston, we're now aware, as Stephen Dole's saying, that the vaccines don't have a permanent impact on us necessarily and can't protect us forever. But does that mean we're going to be in a situation where we're going to be regularly vaccinated ad infinitum?
We don't know, to be honest. We've got to get through this initial period and then work out how this virus is going to interplay with the human population over a period of years. It may be that we do. And we'll have to plan for that. I think, to say that the vaccines don't have a permanent effect on us, I'm not sure that's strictly true. They do. And they have, it's really been vaccination that's got us to the stage where we are now. I certainly agree that perhaps people have become complacent. I think we see that in the behaviours, the lack of mask wearing. I think people have had enough. And so I think if we do want these boosters to really take up again, it's going to have to be a much more effective sort of trying to sell the benefits of what these boosters are actually going to do. Because I think you're right. Many people have thought, well, I've been double jabbed. That has got us out of this pandemic and it's returned to normal. Whereas in fact, as Jonathan Van Tam's been saying quite consistently over the last couple of weeks, there still could be a nasty backlash on this. And the boosters, I think, are going to be a very key way to try and dampen that as we go through the winter.
Thank you both for your extremely valuable insights into this ongoing topic. That's Stephen Doyle, who, of course, is former Health Secretary, and Dr. Andrew Preston, microbiologist at the University of Bath. You're watching The Afternoon Agenda on GB News, and there's lots more still to come. Oh, hello, welcome. If you've just joined me at GB News on The Afternoon Agenda, I'm Alex Phillips, and this show is all about what I think, what you think, and what my guests think. So it's not strictly news as you know it, but also discussion and debate on things that are, or really need to be, on your agenda. Still to come this hour. Concerns over the health of the Queen after she was unable to attend the Remembrance Sunday service at the Cenotaph. We'll ask what it might mean for her public work. And is social media drawing a line through punctuation? Character limits appear to mean we're getting sloppy with grammar. We're going to be getting an expert view on that. Do we need apostrophes after all? And today, we really need to talk about this migrant crisis. Is Vladimir Putin trying to destabilise Europe? That's the agenda for the next hour. But what's on yours? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. But first, it's time for the headlines with Polly.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon. Your news at 5 o'clock on GB News. The terrorism threat level in the UK has been increased to severe, meaning an attack is highly likely. It follows yesterday's car explosion at Liverpool Women's Hospital. Officers believe they've now identified the passenger who detonated an improvised explosive device in the cab, killing himself. The driver, David Perry, escaped with minor injuries, and he's now being praised for his actions, as he said he'd locked the car doors moments before the explosion. 4 people have been arrested under anti-terrorism legislation.
Is a stark reminder of the need for us all to remain utterly vigilant. What yesterday showed, above all, is that the British people will never be cowed by terrorism. We will never give in to those who seek to divide us with senseless acts of violence. And our freedoms and our way of life will always prevail.
We're looking at the area around Sefton Park where the passenger of the bomb attack is said to have lived. A police cordon has been placed around that address where the taxi driver David Perry picked up his passenger. And police are saying significant items were found during a search of that property. A second address also being searched. Well, away from Liverpool, the COVID-19 vaccine booster programme has been extended now to people over 40 years old. The Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation says people who are over 40 should be offered a booster 6 months after their second dose. 16 and 17-year-olds are also being encouraged to come forward for a second Pfizer jab. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, urging everyone to take the vaccine. Meanwhile, a judge in North East Lincolnshire has ruled a 12-year-old boy can be vaccinated despite his mother's objection. He's living at the moment in council care, and it's been concluded that a local authority can arrange and consent his flu and COVID-19 jabs for her. The judge said in his written ruling, this is the first case of its kind. 12 children and 1 adult have been taken to hospital following a ceiling collapse at a school in South London. Around 20 firefighters and 3 fire engines were called to Rosemead Prep School in South London after the incident in a Year 3 classroom. The school's chairman of governors has confirmed there are no life-threatening injuries.
This has been a worrying time for the children involved, their families and the wider school. We understand from initial examinations that there were no concerns regarding the rest of the building, and we will work with the authorities regarding any investigations to be undertaken.
Former Trump advisor Steve Bannon has surrendered to the FBI after being indicted on 2 counts of contempt. That's after he defied a congressional subpoena from the committee investigating the US Capitol riots. The Justice Department says 1 count was for refusing to appear for a deposition, the other for refusing to provide documents. If he is convicted, Mr. Bannon faces up to 2 years in jail. Here, the real living wage has been increased across the country. The new hourly rate will go up to £11.50 for people working in London and £9.90 for people working outside the capital. Almost 9,000 employers already pay the voluntary rate, which is independently calculated and higher than the statutory living wage. His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales' 73rd birthday, yesterday, has been marked with a 41-gun salute. Carried out by the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery in London's Green Park there, the first time a public gun salute has taken place in a royal park for over 20 months. You're right up to date. I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
You're with the afternoon agenda on GB News, and we really need to talk about the ongoing migrant crisis. It is fast becoming a recurring theme across Europe. Migrants from the Middle East and the Sahel amassing at the frontiers of the continent. The West's agitators more than aware of how politically toxic the immigration debate is, dividing citizens between those who scoff at the ineptitude to stem the tide of foreigners and those with placards pointing to emerging humanitarian crises in disaster-strewn and developing world countries. It also divides the continent. The oftentimes more compassionate stance of Western countries quaking in the shadow of Angela Merkel's piety when she announced refugees welcome, and those on the front line in the East where throngs of mainly young men are looming at hastily erected chicken wire fences faced down by legions of troops. Yet at some point, the exodus reaches our own shores, delayed perhaps as migrants pass from country to country trying to seek sanctuary or citizenship, eventually clambering into small boats at the whim of callous criminals and people traffickers. But what when the migratory flows are aided and abetted by hostile state actors, using the migrants as pawns to create instability, egging on clashes before swooping in with a solution which will always come at a cost? Oh, we saw Turkey's Erdogan play that card 5 years ago, an ace that has also appeared in Lukashenko's deck as Putin snickers from the sidelines, watching Europe flap about in a blind panic, wanting to be seen to be doing the right thing while appeasing increasingly angry voters. We really do need to talk about the migrant crisis. The Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight, Bob Seeley, who is on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, joins me now. Bob, we're not really being particularly tough when it comes to this crisis, are we? We're talking tough, but we don't seem to be having much effect on the numbers crossing the Channel.
Alex, hi. Are we talking about the numbers crossing the Channel, or are we talking about Russia and Putin? Because they're really two different things.
At first I'm asking you about the numbers crossing the Channel, and we'll get on to what's going on the Polish border as well, where we do appear to have sent 600 troops. We'll move on to that. But what about our current situation and the south coast of England?
Well, it's not great, and we're waiting. I mean, I've got a lot of faith in Priti Patel. I think she's an excellent Home Secretary, and people who are concerned about immigration and control of borders, I think, should recognise that there isn't anyone who's going to be tougher on them. But we are waiting for the immigration bill to pass through, and when it does, hopefully that will give us far more power to act. It is, it's not great, but the government is trying to deal with what is a very complex situation. And it's somewhat different than Australia, because Australia, it was easier, to put it bluntly, to turn people back when it is very difficult to do it in the world's busiest waterway. And we do have humanitarian responsibilities to those people, even if, we are trying to do everything we can to discourage them.
But we are sending troops to Poland, so I hear, to help them with their emerging crisis, which many claim is being essentially created in a hostile act by Belarus.
Well, it's not hostile backed by Belarus, but it's actually Russia's behind all this. But yes, they are entirely different. You are dealing with migrant flows that are somewhat criminalised, etc., and people coming here, washing up in Calais and Dunkirk and then trying to get over. What has happened with the weaponization of refugees is a specific policy tool. And that actually has been used several times in the past 10 years. It was used by, Russia probably behind the scenes again. It was used by the Syrian regime and its Russian allies in weaponizing migrant flows in Syria. The Russians actually used it themselves against Norway in 2016. And now Belarus is using it as well. So the if you like, the connecting element here is it's either Russia using this or Russian allies. So this is undoubtedly one of the 100 or so tools of hybrid war that the Russians have in their playbook. But it is the difference between Calais and the Belarusian border is that the Belarusian border is a specific element of policy and state policy designed to undermine and designed effectively as a weapon of non-traditional conflict.
How much should the UK be getting involved in this particular escalation, given that this isn't happening on our frontier? We've now left the EU and it's surely their problem. And is there a risk that by jumping in and sending troops that this could escalate into a second Cold War, if not worse?
Okay, well, the new Cold War actually started in 2007, but Western governments were desperate not to notice, and we wanted to continue having funny money coming in from Moscow, from China and elsewhere. So we sort of did our best to ignore the new Cold War, which Putin was very clear about because he declared it at the Munich Security Conference in a speech in, I think, February 2007, or whenever the Munich Security Conference takes place. So it's been very clear because the Russians actually signal. They signal what they're going to do because they think that helps justify their behavior. So unfortunately, it took 7 years for us to realize at the beginning of the Ukraine war that we were dealing with a seriously much more aggressive Russia. But we have continued to, unfortunately, run a rather incoherent policy since then. And even now, we are struggling to be coherent. So we actually need to look at Russian policy across all the spheres where Russia is active and work out to a consistent approach to dealing with Russia. When it comes to your specific question, Alex, about, it's not our border, you're right, it isn't our border, and it isn't, and you're right to say that we are not members of the European Union anymore, but what it is a NATO border, and Poland is a NATO ally. And actually Poland and Britain, despite what people may or may not think about Poland's current government, we have very close links with, and actually we have strong responsibilities too as a fellow member of NATO. So we should be getting involved. We should be sending a significant number of troops to help buttress their borders, and I congratulate the government because it's the right thing to do. But we have also got to understand Putin's tactics, because you can't see Belarus in isolation. Belarusian border, the buildup of Russian troops in East Ukraine, and the potential manipulation of a conflict in Bosnia, these are all parts of the same plan about how Putin is trying to undermine NATO because he resents it and hates it, and also how Putin is going to eventually act sooner or later against the Ukraine again.
I mean, Poland has talked about invoking Article 4 of NATO to get all the NATO members gathered around the table because they see this as a massive incursion into their territory. But has America essentially thrown NATO under the bus a bit by being a bit weak on foreign policy when it comes to Russia since the inauguration of Biden?
I would say, if anything, actually Biden's tougher on Putin and Russia than Trump ever was, because Trump appeared to be deeply compromised. So, and I think the Americans have said some fairly tough things about respecting Ukrainian sovereignty. I'm sorry, it's not America that's the problem here. It's the pathetic weakness of the European Union and European Union states. And very specifically, look, Putin's a gambler. Putin knows that the Germans have got an incoherent energy policy, which is now a security disaster as well as an environmental shocker. The Germans, after Fukushima and with the incoherent German Green movement on Merkel's back, they've shut down all 17 nuclear reactors. They've become increasingly dependent on coal, brown coal, the most polluting form of energy production known to humanity, and they've become increasingly dependent on gas. Where are they getting both of those from? Vladimir Putin. The Germans are paying for Russian rearmament. The Germans are paying for the Russian war machine that is sitting on the edge of Ukraine and maybe kicking off in Belarus and maybe kicking off in Bosnia as well. We're paying for this. The Germans are paying for this. And because Germany is so in hoc to Russia's energy supply, that energy addiction, Putin has probably taken the calculation that the Germans will throw some, if Putin does invade Ukraine or eastern Ukraine or one or two districts, one or two counties, oblasts in eastern Ukraine, the Germans will kick off. They're going to say lots of, be so outraged about it, they'll throw out some diplomats, but fundamentally the Russians will get away with it, Alex. And that's what the Russians are probably calculating right now, which is why it's a very dangerous situation. But it's not dangerous because the Americans are weak. It's dangerous because the French want to deal with the Russians again, and the Germans are just in hock to Russia's energy supply. They can't afford to be too antagonistic in their relationship because they're dependent.
Bob, thank you so much for your fascinating and refreshing insight into that, especially regarding Nord Stream 2, and picking up there that Germany is still in negotiations with Russia to build a pipeline, bypassing Ukraine, of course. I'm joined now by Franak Vyachoka, who's a Belarusian politician and journalist and advisor to the Belarus opposition leader. It's a really great privilege to have you talking on this show today. How do you perceive the situation on the Polish border and the relationship between Belarus and Russia at the moment? Do you think the two are acting together to create issues for Europe, or do you think that this is more of a unilateral behaviour by Lukashenko?
Situation on the border deteriorates. It's dramatic. Many people are frozen on the border, and there is no access for international organizations to help them. Also, Belarusian security forces are trying to push these poor people in the direction of Polish fence, of Polish border guards. And we see today for 4 or 5 hours there was almost open conflict, open confrontation between them. Regarding your second question about Russia and Belarus, I think it was an initiative of Lukashenko, same as hijacking of Ryanair flight a few months ago, because Lukashenko himself is very impulsive and he wants to demonstrate the strength. He's for 27 years in power and he wants to look as a strong man. He likes to be in the spotlight. And Putin in this situation, he takes advantage of the situation. Even not being directly involved, he just allows this to happen. And he feels pretty comfortable in having and seeing this confrontation between Belarus and the West.
And what's been the reaction back in your own country? I mean, there were accusations that the election of Lukashenko was rigged. It wasn't an honest and open and fair election. But does Belarus now risk becoming a bit of a pariah state? And also, of course, there's been a lot of reaction in Poland to the gathering masses of migrants on your border, but on their border. But of course, they're in your country. What's the reaction in Belarus to the current state of affairs?
I'm very sad to see what's happening in the country, because it's becoming totalitarian state where military junta rules. The very small group of people, clique of Lukashenko, basically controls the major ministries. Also, there is no any form, even illusion of democracy. People are in jail. More than 1,200 people are political prisoners, and more than 40,000 people got detained since last August. It's the biggest repressions in Europe in 40 years. And unfortunately, the situation escalates even more. Lukashenko becomes himself outcast, and he makes Belarus the outlier, the outcast state in the center of Europe. But I think the solution is pretty clear. If the Europe, the West, the international community will act quickly, will be brave enough, we can stop together the dictatorship and to help both to solve Belarusian crisis and to solve migrant crisis.
Franak Vyachoka, thank you so much for coming and speaking to us today. And let's catch up again as this situation unfolds. It's been really important to get your views today. Well, I'm joined now by political journalist and commentator George Bajinski. Almost got it right there. This is escalating to quite a worrying point now, isn't it? There's talk or allegations that the Belarusian regime might be feeding the restless migrants with vodka while they're struggling on that border in freezing conditions, and they're desperate. Are you scared this could escalate? With shots being fired and eventually mortalities?
Absolutely, anything can happen. So many migrants already died. I think in the last few weeks it was over 10 people that died in the forests. It's making sense, though, what they're trying to do. Before, one could think this is just random, or there are some migrants that we ought to help. Now, I think everybody knows this is not the case. This is orchestrated. And what's very worrying is that this crisis will fuel. And what I think they tried to do is they wanted to be a situation similar to Turkey, where Turkey received a lot of money from the EU to seal its shores and borders, and now it's the Belarusians that want to receive the same money.
It's interesting to hear that. I did actually mention in the introduction that Erdogan had pulled a very similar trick, and it seems to me the same ace is now sitting in the deck of cards that Lukashenko's holding. But when it comes to, I've had two different opinions on how the EU is handling this. And of course, Poland has been having a bit of a ding-dong with the European Commission over the supremacy of laws, and particularly when it comes to wanting to change their judicial system. And Poland's being quite assertive about how it wants to handle this crisis. Are you confident that the EU has Poland's back? Because only just today, the EU is actually taking Hungary to task for some of their policies regarding migrants entering that country.
I think this is very petty that we have these quarrels in the European Union and this pressure from Brussels about all sorts of things while we have a real threat to the east. And it's all connected. It's not just the migrant crisis. The migrant crisis is just a part of the plan. You can see that Gazprom is sending less gas for the Yamal Europe pipeline. This is happening exactly during the energy crisis that's hurting a lot of economies. And Nord Stream 2 is the new pipeline which will be used very soon and is built by Germany and Russia, with acceptance from many European leaders. So the message from Gazprom will be quite clear. Look at Belarus, Ukraine, Poland, those countries having those migrant crises. We will have a new pipeline and send the gas directly to you that you should accept. So they will come as saviors and suddenly everything will be good because they will attempt to fix it. But I do not think that's the case. They have orchestrated this crisis. And as you've said before, it's increasingly dangerous. I've seen videos taken at night by Polish soldiers of Belarusian soldiers trying to destroy the fences which constitute the border, and the migrants were just around the corner waiting to be let in, and they used some lasers to blind the Polish soldiers. It's extremely dangerous, and I've read just half an hour ago that the European Foreign Affairs secretaries, they agreed new sanctions on Lukashenko. I think that's certainly needed, but more is needed. And I know that Liz Truss is sending some soldiers to Poland. She had the great comment in the Telegraph where she said that we need to do everything to support Poland and the Visegrad countries right now, because this crisis concerns the whole continent.
But just very briefly, it seems to me that you're backing up what I've heard other guests say, which is Poland's really on the sharp end of the politics going on between the EU, particularly Germany and Russia. Could this lead to Pole exit, and would that be a good thing for Poland or a bad thing?
It's a difficult question that not many people actually ask at the moment in Poland, because Poland does not have the same alternatives that the UK had. We do not have that Commonwealth past and connections of trade all around. And our location of Poland and the other countries nearby is slightly more difficult, as you can see, with Russia to the east and Germany to the west. We are seeking alliances, and we're desperate for alliances and strong allies. So Polexit is quite unlikely at the moment, but it seems that some people in Brussels are doing some sort of unnecessary pressure on the Poland, Hungary and other countries that is conflicting the spirit of Europe, that may lead eventually in some years in the future of other countries leaving European Union if we won't take a step back and come back to the roots of the EU, which is cooperating of independent nations.
George, thank you so much for coming in and giving me your insights yet again. I'm sure we'll have you back as this crisis continues to unfold.
I look forward to that.
Now, After the break, the terror threat level is increased to severe following the Liverpool Women's Hospital explosion. We'll get the latest live from our home and security editor, but first it's the weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. There will be a few fog patches once more overnight that'll take a while to clear, but for most of England and Wales it's a dry day tomorrow. A different day though for Scotland and Northern Ireland, with rain moving in and also turning windy thanks to this tangle of weather fronts approaching from the northwest. But high pressure is dominating elsewhere. There's this old set of weather fronts that's kind of fizzling out, but still providing some rain and drizzle through the evening over northern England and Wales, maybe parts of Cornwall too. But it does tend to fizzle out. We'll see some clearer skies across the south, and that may allow some fog patches to form, and clearer skies further north until that next weather system brings some rain and increasing winds across the northwest. Those gusty winds, though, will keep the temperatures up, so a mild night here. Elsewhere, a little cooler with temperatures well down into single figures. A mostly cloudy start then to Tuesday, but for most it will be a dry start. There will be some fog around across England and Wales. It may take a while to clear, and then things turn wet across Northern Ireland for a spell around the middle of the day. Western Scotland seeing some fairly heavy rain and some gusty winds too. Further south it stays largely dry, and again it'll be pretty mild. If we see any brightness, could easily get into the teens, but feeling cooler with the wet and windy weather. A spell of very lively showers crosses Scotland with gusty winds and more showers, which turn a little wintry over the tops of the mountains overnight, and there'll still be a bit of snow on the hills as we head into Wednesday morning. A few showers then coming in on Wednesday for Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, northwest England, but otherwise again elsewhere most places dry, and a brighter day across much of the south and east with some decent spells of sunshine. But it will be still pretty windy, particularly across northern Britain, and that will make it feel cooler. And temperatures generally a little down on Wednesday as well, so a fresher feel, but still those numbers are about average for the time of year. It will turn milder again through the rest of this week. Lots of cloud around, but apart from a bit of rain across the northwest, most places dry. Signs of things turning colder though this weekend.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Welcome back to the afternoon agenda on GB News, and there's a lot more still to come this hour, but first we're going to get the news headlines with Polly.
Very good afternoon. The latest news headlines this hour. The terrorism threat level in the UK has been increased to severe, meaning an attack is highly likely. That follows yesterday's car explosion at Liverpool Women's Hospital. Officers now believe they've identified the passenger who detonated the improvised explosive device in the cab, killing himself. The driver, meanwhile, David Perry, escaped with minor injuries, and 4 people have been arrested under anti-terrorism legislation. 12 children and 1 adult have been taken to hospital after a ceiling collapsed at a school in South London. The incident happened in a Year 3 classroom at Rosemead Prep School in Dulwich. The Chairman of Governors has confirmed there are no life-threatening injuries. The COVID-19 vaccine booster programme has been extended now to people over the age of 40. A joint committee on vaccination and immunisation working for the government says they should be offered the jab 6 months after their second dose. And in the States, former Trump advisor Steve Bannon has surrendered to the FBI after being indicted on 2 counts of contempt. That's after he defied a congressional subpoena from the committee investigating the US Capitol riots. If he's convicted, he faces up to 2 years in jail. And turkey is still on the Christmas menu this year. Poultry bosses telling us there will definitely be enough to meet demand. The British Poultry Council says staffing pressures have eased after more visas were issued to foreign workers, and it's confirmed producers have also managed to recruit some EU seasonal workers who've settled in the UK. You're up to date. I'm back in half an hour.
Well, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has said the British people will never be cowed by terrorism following the attack in Liverpool, adding, "We will never give in to those who seek to divide us with senseless acts of violence." It follows the explosion outside Liverpool Women's Hospital on Remembrance Sunday. The terror threat level has been raised to severe after 2 attacks in the space of a month, including the killing of Sir David Amess MP.
It's just before 11 a.m. on Remembrance Sunday. As the nation pauses to remember its war dead, this security camera captures the moment a taxi pulls up at the front of Liverpool Women's Hospital. Moments later, an explosion. As smoke pours from the taxi, the driver, David Perry, can be seen staggering from the vehicle, thankfully with only minor injuries. In the back of the cab, as it's engulfed in flames, a man who police now believe was a bomber, who brought his explosive device into the taxi. It's not clear what any intended target was, but police say he asked the driver to take him to the women's hospital. A memorial service was also taking place nearby. The explosion has now been formally declared a terrorist incident.
Following discussions with Army Ordnance Disposal, we are able to confirm that this is being treated as the ignition of an explosive device. Our inquiries also indicate that the device was brought into the cab by the passenger. We believe we know the identity of the passenger, but we cannot confirm this at this time.
The taxi driver, who's now been released from hospital and is recovering at home, has been hailed a hero. Away from the scene of the explosion, police raided 2 residential addresses and made 4 arrests. Those arrested under the Terrorism Act are still in police custody today, being questioned by counter-terrorism detectives who are trying to piece together information about the suspect and his movements prior to the explosion. At Rutland Avenue, around a mile from the hospital, there is still a heavy police presence. A mobile police command unit has been set up at the end of the street as a property linked to the dead suspect is searched. Neighbours told us of their shock at the unfolding events.
You don't really see stuff around here like that. I think it's a bit mad wherever you live, you see things like this, isn't it? We don't really know what's going on.
Yeah, it's a bit clueless.
Even the police just said they don't really know what's going on.
Well, the other police at that side said there was a manhunt.
Police and security services are now urgently trying to establish whether there is any wider threat to the public. They've said they've discovered significant items at the Rutland Avenue address and are likely to be involved in a prolonged search of that property. Mark White, GB News, Liverpool.
Well, our GB News home and security editor Mark White is in Liverpool. Mark, what's the latest?
Well, the very latest is that police have just carried out a controlled explosion in Sefton Park, about 1.5 miles from the location here at the hospital. This is in an area, of course, where they have been carrying out raids and arrests over recent hours, overnight and yesterday, with 4 people in custody. It's in a field in Sefton Park that they carried out this controlled explosion. We don't know exactly what the item of concern was. We know, of course, in Rutland Avenue, again about 1 mile or so from here, still a very significant police presence there. Police saying that they have found significant items within a property there. We understand that that may well have been the bomb factory where this device was constructed and detonated in the back of the taxi, just about 100 yards from where I'm standing. Throughout today, forensic teams have been carrying out a detailed examination of the remains of that vehicle. They are trying, as a matter of priority, to understand more about the device, how it was constructed. Of course, the fact that that car is so badly damaged won't help them there, but if they have indeed found the bomb factory, then that will be of great evidential value to them, because in finding that, it will give them indications as to where the ingredients for this improvised explosive device were purchased. Crucially, whether there may be others devices that have been constructed that might be out there posing a wider threat to the public. And while we don't know for certain if that's the case, we've seen the terror threat level now raised to its 2nd highest level, severe, meaning a terrorist attack is highly likely. The issues surrounding this particular attack, and of course the fact that it comes just a few weeks after the Conservative MP Sir David Amos was stabbed to death in an apparent terrorist attack in Essex, have really prompted those security analysts to raise that terror threat level.
And Mark, the Prime Minister has also spoken today on this matter, hasn't he?
Yes, he was chairing a meeting of the Government's Crisis Cabinet Committee, COBRA, in Downing Street, to try to determine, of course, how this investigation is getting on, whether there is any specific significant wider threat from the event that took place here on Sunday, but also in the context of this having taken place on Sunday, that murder of Sir David Amess as well just a few weeks ago, and generally the chatter that's out there from jihadis in particular, from the Middle East, those that are radicalising people here in this country, whether there is a wider threat to be concerned about. After that Cobra meeting, he spoke about the raising of the terrorist threat level.
It is a stark reminder of the need for us all to remain utterly vigilant, and the Independent Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre, JTAC, are today raising the UK's threat level from substantial to severe, meaning an attack is highly likely. But what yesterday showed, above all, is that the British people will never be cowed by terrorism. We will never give in to those who seek to divide us with senseless acts of violence. And our freedoms and our way of life will always prevail.
Mark, thank you very much for giving us the update, and I'm sure we'll be catching up again tomorrow. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Mark White. Concern has been expressed over the ongoing health of the Queen after she was forced to miss the Remembrance Sunday service yesterday. It was to be her first public engagement after a fortnight of rest, with the monarch said to be disappointed to have missed it. The palace revealed that the Queen had sprained her back. However, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said that he visited the monarch last week and that she is doing very well. Joining me now is royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams. Richard, thank you so much for being on the show today. I feel as if the country is poised with bated breath. We just want to know the Queen's OK and she's going to be able to resume royal duties. But do you think that this sort of scaled back operations that she's doing now is probably what we should expect from here forwards?
Well, apparently, so we understand, the sprained back, and remember, she, of course, was determined to attend a Remembrance Sunday commemoration at the Cenotaph, but it actually involved a trip from Windsor, a stand for half an hour in the cold. She had been advised, as we all know, to do light duties. And from that point of view, I think, with the two instances being unconnected, this was just extremely unfortunate. As you mentioned, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said that she was very well when he saw her last Wednesday. And we know that she was at Sandringham for the weekend and, of course, returned to Windsor. I think everybody recognises that the Queen at 95, a model for those of advanced age, obviously will be participating in a schedule on medical advice, and clearly that is very likely to involve much more that is virtual. But equally, she's always said, I must be seen to be believed, and undoubtedly we can expect to see her in person when this is possible.
It seems to me that we've seen, up until quite recently, a very smiley and energised Queen, beaming from ear to ear in a lot of her official duties. But is there a chance here that our beloved monarch hasn't been given much time to grieve her husband?
Well, of course, there's no doubt whatsoever that her strength and stay was so much part of a partnership that's one of the great royal romances, an absolutely unique blend of two completely different temperaments to support the monarchy, and also, of course, so important symbolically for the nation. I think that the Queen enjoys being seen. I mean, for example, the opening of the Scottish and Welsh Parliaments. So this was very, very important in her role as head of state. But also, and I think we can take comfort from this, if we're going to see more appearances that are virtual, she's an expert at this. I mean, the broadcast last year about the pandemic, quoting from Dame Vera Lynn, had most viewers feeling deeply moved. And of course, the 75th anniversary of VE Day, and she was actually there in 1945. I mean, of course, she will have been very disappointed to miss yesterday because, I mean, thinking back, her first royal engagement was in 1942 when her father, King George VI, made her Colonel of the Grenadier Guards. So it's an extraordinary look back over decades of history, but very, very important to stress that she is so current. I mean, that pre-recorded broadcast she did for COP26, which she sadly had to miss, it was superb. She crafts them so well.
I mean, it's Prince Charles' birthday yesterday, of course, but it seems to me that it's really William and Kate who are stealing the limelight at the moment and are being promoted to have a far more active and visible role when it comes to the duties of the monarchy.
Oh, there's no question at all that William and Kate are the future of the monarchy after Charles and Camilla. I mean, this is the way that monarchy works. And also what we've seen is them adopt certain charities and certain, I mean, Catherine, for example, the issues linked to young children, William, environmental issues such as the Earthshot Prize and mental health, and they can give them publicity and they can put a drive behind them internationally that no one else can. I mean, of course, it's unfair in a sense to compare them because the Prince of Wales has carved out his role for so many years. Of course, we all know, to quote from Alan Bennett's The Madness of King George, being Prince of Wales isn't a position, it's a predicament. Well, he's done pretty well in creating his own position, but there's no doubt whatsoever that, of course, when you are younger, you have an extra burst of life. And, of course, all the royal family are used as our best weapon of soft power in a very dangerous world, as you've been discussing a bit earlier.
Richard, thank you so much for coming on today. Richard Fitzwilliams, royal commentator. Now, the apostrophe may die out because of sloppy grammar on social media. Oh, yeah, I hate sloppy grammar. Online platforms such as Twitter, which limits the number of characters per post, mean users are getting into the habit of dropping punctuation. Casualties include the possessive apostrophe in plural nouns, such as cat's paws, or those which replace a letter, such as in couldn't for could not. Well, joining me now is friend of the show and honorary treasurer, English Spelling Society, Stephen Linstead. I mean, language evolves over time, but it seems to me that these character limitations and so-called text speak, or the acronyms, really is starting to kill off some of the finesse of the English language.
Possibly. I think we have to remember that punctuation itself is a relatively recent, in terms of language, over the thousands of years, it's a relatively recent invention. And as the Times pointed out today, we didn't have apostrophes before the 16th century. I think it's important to have apostrophes, well, a bit. But I think it's perhaps, in terms of fighting for correct English, I think it's an outer bastion of accepted standards. It can probably be abandoned without too much threat to grammar and syntax generally, or to spelling. I would always put apostrophes in. That's where I was brought up, and I think it does add something to distinction of meaning. But I don't get too upset about apostrophes, I have to say.
It seems to me that the English language, or English, let's say, is evolving tremendously quickly, faster than ever before, with the globalization of language, let's say, the influence coming over from across the Atlantic, Americanization of words, and also the digitization of communication. Are you someone who really embraces the natural evolution of language and etymology, or do you think that we really should, as a society, try and instill good old-fashioned traditional linguistics and grammar into people and encourage people to use proper speaking, so to say?
Well, that's quite a lot of subjects in a single sentence, I think, with respect. I mean, in terms of the interchange between America and Britain in vocabulary, that is an inevitable and a long-term process. And I'm glad to say I don't think it's all one way, because I gather that quite a few British isms have penetrated America recently. As far as rules are concerned, I think all languages need rules of grammar and of syntax and of spelling. And notwithstanding that, all language evolves. Words change their meaning. People attach more or less importance to certain aspects, peripheral aspects of language. I think the change of language is inevitable. I think it is important to try and preserve rules, because if you don't have any rules, then distinction of meaning can become far less clear.
Every year we're told by people like the Oxford English Dictionary what the most popular term was for the year, and introduced to a whole wealth of neologisms we haven't heard before. But do you think, by and large, the English language is getting richer as a result, or poorer? Are we losing some of our depth when it comes to synonyms, for example?
I don't think we're losing any richness. I think we may be suffering from a bit of indigestion about the enormous number of words that come through every year. But there is a natural thinning out process, I think. Words have their vogue and they go away just like slang. I mean, raunchy was an incredibly popular word some time ago, and careen and things like that. They come in and they go. I think there is a natural tendency for language to naturally reduce the, otherwise you just have total linguistic indigestion, I think. There is a slightly natural process of getting rid of things as well as acquiring them, I think.
Stephen, I'm relieved to hear that you're not as concerned as I am about the atrophying of our language here and embracing, let's say, the natural etymological evolution of the English language. That's Stephen Linstead there, who is the treasurer of the English Spelling Society. That's a society I really want to join, can I just say? Now, on the programme today, we've been talking about the migrant crisis and asking if Vladimir Putin is trying to destabilise Europe. Well, lots of comments from you, and here's a taster of a few of them. Paddy says the problems in Europe are the EU's problems, not necessarily NATO problems. Let's the EU sort out their own problems, bring our troops home from Poland, and remember the outcome of previous European conflicts. Ted says, I hear all the European Union states screaming about the pretend refugees in Poland, but not complaining about the French. As far as NATO is concerned, we should pull out of this crisis and leave Europe to its own devices. Calv says, no need for Vladimir to do that. Europe is more than capable of tearing itself apart. And of course, we put that question up on Twitter for you as well to vote on. Is Vladimir Putin trying to destabilise Europe? 83% of you say yes. 17% of you don't believe he is. Would you thunk? You've been watching The Afternoon Agenda with me, Alex Phillips. Join me again from tomorrow from 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. Coming up next, of course, it's the wonderful Michelle Dewberry with Jubes & Co. So don't go anywhere. And from me, have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.
It's time to remind ourselves, there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Things turning quite windy overnight across northern Britain, and that'll stay that way through Tuesday as well. There'll be a bit of rain for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but most of England and Wales will be dry thanks to this area of high pressure. It's further north, though, where this low and this set of weather fronts is approaching. Ahead of all of that, we've got a dying weather front that's still been making for quite a dank and drizzly day over parts of northern England and Wales, and still some rain and drizzle here through the evening, but it continues to fizzle out. Further south, we could see some fog patches where we have some clearer skies, and that could take a while to clear on Tuesday. Meanwhile, that weather system really pepping the winds up across the far northwest. Quite mild here, but elsewhere a bit of a chilly start to Tuesday. Mostly grey starts, some places seeing a bit of sunshine. A bit of fog in the south will take a while to clear away. Could stick around certainly through the morning rush hour. It's going to turn wet across western Scotland, and for a time